So we're gonna say good morning or good afternoon, or just kind of have it like a, all right, good.
Yeah. All right, John. So I just pressed record on our first ever conversation on one of our Postcards for Parents topics. I'm thrilled to be here on January 6th, 2021, and it's nice to see you.
Oh, it's good to see you, Kate. And we're hopefully in a better new year, and that's the time will tell. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and that dovetails really well with the topic that we have written to folks about this week, which is hope. And I feel like that it's potentially an out of vogue term, or it's just not something that's top of mind in terms of what parents should be cultivating in their kids these days. But tell me, you came up with this idea, so tell me why hope from your point of view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think at the essence of our ability to maintain a positive sense of ourselves, of our lives unfolding and moving forward, is this concept of hope. And that hope is not a cognition as much as it is an emotion. However, there's some melding there, because I think oftentimes we'll tie hopeful thoughts to some potential outcome or narrative that we'd like to have happen. But I think that at its deepest level, hope is something that's not dependent upon particular outcomes, and that the preservation of hope is just such a central component within any of our capacity to kind of stay balanced, to stay able to confront the challenges that lie ahead, to be resilient. And if you were to ask me, what is one of the central things that we want to give our kids, Kate? So we want to give them resiliency. We can't protect them from all the bumps and bruises, hurts, and sometimes deep sorrows that are going to come their way. So when we're able to instill within them a sense of hope, that's just it's a part of their nature. It's a part of their sense of self. And we'll, over the years ahead, as we talk, we'll talk about this notion of self and what does that mean. But having a sense of self that has incorporated in it a sense of hopefulness is just, it's very, very important and powerful. And the way that we instill that in kids is not simple. I mean, I think that, there are a number of things that we teach kids, I've always loved the idea that empathy is not taught, it's caught. I think hopefulness falls kind of in that same category. And that for children to experience parents who are not walking around just pie in the sky, oh, everything's wonderful, I know it's going to be wonderful because I have this armament of hope. That's bullshit. Sorry. The older I get, the less over my language. I know I'm being videotaped. I've got to be careful. So, but it's not that. What it is a quiet and gentle place inside us, and inside a child that says it's going to be okay. That's nothing I want to give a child that's greater than that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, and so when I think of hope, it feels really good, and it does do what you said, which is it kind of it takes away the sense of anxiety that you might have with a goal, like, am I going to make it or not? As soon as you make a goal, then you're then in a state of anxiety as to whether or not you're going to get that goal. But with hope, it's a much more pleasant and optimistic feeling of like almost just letting yourself go into this thing that you hope for, I guess. But what I'm curious about is there, like, are you less likely to achieve something if you're just hoping for it and not working for it? Or, how does, and then I guess in parallel, if you just hope too many times and those hopes don't come true, do you lose your hope?
Well, I think, there are a couple different things I want to say about that, Kate. First of all is that hope isn't necessarily about a specific outcome. Hope is about a sense that whatever the outcome, I'm gonna be okay. That's it. And it's not so. And if you ask me, what is it that drives us forward? What pulls us in to challenge and into longing, into doing things that could represent accomplishments for us. I think there are two things that can pull us in, maybe more, but as I sit here right now, I think of two. I think one is fear. I fear that my fear of incompetency, my fear of failure, my fear of not being enough, or my fear of being too much, and all the things that we have at these core levels of fear. And fear is not a great driver. Mm-hmm. Fear burns us out. Fear lights the fuse, and it can only burn for so long. Or hope pulls us forward. Hope allows us to just keep going, and it even sustains disappointment in not getting what we thought we had hoped for. There have been people in my life who've been instrumental in helping me learn this lesson, and I think that the idea that with each door that shuts, others open if we stay open to it.
So wait. I just want to pause on that. So that sort of sounds like, that sort of sounds like just having this hopeful attitude, even if you don't get what you thought, what you wanted, you're pretty confident that other good doors will open.
Pretty confident that you're going to be okay. It's not, in the words of Mick Jagger, just a deep awareness that you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you just might find you get what you need. And that what keeps you trying is the hope, because in the absence of hope, there's really limited ability for us to persevere. If I'm hopeless, then how am I going to pick up the rock and try it again? I'm not. Mm-hmm. Hopeless, because hopelessness may be about achieving something, or hopeless may be more core to the sense of being hopeful that I'm enough. I'm enough to have people love me. I'm enough to have people care about me. I'm enough to have people choose me. You'll hear at all of those I'm talking about how central people are and our relationship to others, to our well-being, and that hope at its deepest level is at hope for a sense of connection, a sense of belonging, a sense of finding a way of being enough and not being alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's take it back to specific to kids' experience, and I guess I'm curious, do you see kind of what you would call natural variations? Like, are some kids more hopeful than others? And what are the things that tend to either make kids increase hope or decrease hope?
Yeah, Kate, I think that folks who join us on this journey are going to hear me talk a few times about just a model, and it's a model, and there are ways in which it's not ideal, but that our sense of self is organized around two broad variables. One, at its core, with real primacy, the fundamental one is, am I lovable? Because it is only my being lovable that's going to get me through childhood, because I am completely dependent upon people to love me and take care of me. We're a species that matures very slowly. Mm-hmm. My wife is waiting for me to complete the process. It's so the idea that we're organized around two things. One, am I lovable? And the other one is, am I competent? That's helpful. Clearly, feeling lovable has primacy. But if there's any vulnerability in that realm, then we're likely to try to take safe harbor in I'm competent. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then we may put our hope into our competencies. And children put a lot of hope into their competencies versus their fundamental, just joyful sense of being lovable. kids who put a great amount of hope in being competent are much more likely to get discouraged because we can never be competent all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And be lovable almost all the time. Matter of we need to be lovable all the time, even though sometimes we may not be likable as a child or an adult. So I mean, I think that I think with kids, you're going to see kids who have a little, varying degrees of focus on their sense of being okay, connected to whether or not they are just experiencing these kind of joyful connections with others versus this evolving sense of competency. Both are important. You want eggs in both of those baskets.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the kids who are more focused on the competency, you're going to see in those kids just a greater vulnerability, because that's something that's about doing, not about being.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back to that, am I lovable? It's about being. That's me. I'm lovable. And competency is about doing. That's what I can do. So I think that's one variable that's going to determine how kids are. I think another variable is the nature of the losses that they have, relational losses. Kids who have had relational losses, who've lost a parent, kids who have lost their parents' focus because of parents' drug addiction or alcoholism or depression or struggles within the parental marriage, those kids are going to struggle with a fundamental and deep sense of whether or not, a deep sense of hope about whether or not they're enough or whether they're too much. Those are kind of two ways that we can miss the mark in terms of feeling lovable. Somehow who I am isn't quite enough, or somehow who I am is just too much.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I was a little guy who, with a pretty structured and not altogether insightful mom, all these many years ago. And my struggle, because I probably had ADHD, I wasn't diagnosed then, but once again, my wife would diagnose me very quickly currently. But that for me, the dilemma, I was too much. I had too much energy. I had too many things that I would be interested in, too many things that I would take apart, too many things. And that was it made me not feel particularly hopeful about whether or not I was ever going to be what I needed to be. Now, the good news is we can heal that. The good news is that even if our kids early on have some struggles around some of those issues, that life is just an ongoing endeavor, an opportunity to discover and heal those places in us that are hurt.
This is so interesting because you're really talking about hope coming from a place of being loved and accepted, first by our parents, correct?
Yes.
And one of my other questions was going to be like, how is hope related to optimism? And there's a lot of literature about optimism and, the kind of optimistic explanatory style versus pessimistic explanatory style, which, has to do with whether you think things are your fault, whether you think, you caused good things or you caused bad things, or they were external, whether they're going to stay. Is the hope that you're talking about related to that?
I think it is. I mean, in some respects, a lot of what we're going to talk about, you're going to find different people that use a little different language.
Mm-hmm.
The language that I use largely comes out of the attachment literature. That's my niche. But it's not to say that there aren't other folks who've looked at it through a little different lens and used a little different language to describe it. But what I would say is that, perhaps more in an explanatory way as to why some kids are more optimistic or more hopeful. I would go back and look at some of those early dynamics.
Yeah.
I also think there are kids who come in this world with different kinds of neurology. I talked about mine as a little guy that was challenging in some ways to the people who loved me. Or kids who, on the spectrum, kids who have lower intellectual ability, or sometimes kids who are extremely bright and find themselves kind of dealing with existential issues before they're emotionally ready to. And the parents don't know it, don't know how to manage it. And so they end up feeling very alone with that. So there's all these range of variables that can kind of play out and complicate that journey for kids.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, but just to link back what you were saying, I mean, I have also seen studies that link that pessimistic or optimistic explanatory style to very closely to secure attachment or not. So yeah, I think
I have no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And secure, attachment, when you're looking at those categories, attachment, as I said, that's my deal. That's, that's where, over the years of my work with kids and families, a wide range of different types of kids and families, it's just become so clear to me that that's where the rubber meets the road. Mm-hmm. That's where it's going to be helpful. And if things get off track, that's where they get off track. Now, when we think about attachment, one of the things that's important to remember is that there's a tendency for, kind of I'm thinking, blocking on the word, but just a predisposition for a particular attachment style, which may be more insecure, ambivalent, avoidant, or more secure. And that's a part of who we are. But at its essence, attachment is controlled by the dynamic between two people. So it's really related, because I could be phenomenally, insecurely attached with my mom and profoundly attached with my dad. Mm-hmm. So it isn't like it is, something that gets stamped into a child and then that's how all things play out. And it's one of the ways in which children kind of move from insecure attachments, is that they begin to have experiences with others who know how to find them, who know how to convey to them a sense of joy in their being. And that's where things begin to change. So just as an early commentary on the notion of attachment, it isn't fixed in terms of our primary mode of moving forward with it, nor is it fixed across different relationships. Different relationships can have different quality of attachment with it.
Mm-hmm. So let's move into a couple of things. So there's also, I think, quite frequently, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that happens that the parent absolutely loves the child, but the child might not experience it that way. Is that true?
Absolutely.
So if we're talking to parents who we, assume that the vast majority do feel a deep love for their kids, so we could almost just say that there's interference in terms of the communication, right? And in terms of the kind of that being received on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think that communication is a part of it, but I think attunement's probably a bigger part of it.
Okay.
I think that is how well does this parent know what it's like to be this child? Not just know it, but feel it. Does this child feel felt by this parent? That's at the core of the attachment process. Now, many parents never felt, they didn't have the experience of feeling felt. And so, the wonderful gift is that children give us a chance to learn what we didn't learn with our own parents. And so it's something that can change. But I think that there are multiple variables. So one of them is a parent's empathic attunement to their child. And that parent may love that child deeply. Because I think that, one of the things we see this, because I've worked a great deal with autism, children and adults. One of the things that I've seen in that population that's been very compelling, touching, is many of the folks on the spectrum are profoundly kind. They care so much about relationships, but they are not good at reading what others are experiencing, or the dynamic between them. And so they have all these kind of relational failures. And then they begin to retreat and they become relationally avoidant because they experience themselves as incapable of to make it work. So some parents are going to be more empathically attuned, but they may love their child just, oh my God, and it may be breaking their heart that they don't know how to find that child emotionally. There's also a concept that is talked about sometimes in terms of relational style. You can have some folks who are relational. You've got a continuum. Water. A continuum of, you have one end. You've got people who are relationally dismissive, versus at the other end of the continuum, people who are relationally preoccupied. Now, most of us fall here in the middle. But there's been some interesting research in looking at adoption process in particular, that if you place a child whose style is more relationally dismissive with a parent who's relationally preoccupied, it often is not going to go well. Better off if they are temperamentally similar. And one of the things that we know is that because they're biologically different, adopted children are less likely to have similar biological temperament. Now, I don't want to go too far down that path, but I do think that it's relevant. And I see it oftentimes in work with families. I'll see a teenager who's just shut down with their parents. And the fact is, this kid is relationally preoccupied, and they are so hurt and so discouraged that they just stop making themselves available. And they may have a parent who loves them dearly, but they're a little more relationally dismissive, and they have not had an attunement to how their behaviors have impacted how the child is experiencing them. I'll sometimes say, Dad, I think you were trying to use a scalpel there, but unfortunately, Susie experienced it as a chainsaw. And so we got to help you with that. And so there's lots of different variables that play into the dance and how it plays out in the relationship between the parent and the child in the movement towards the secure attachment. At some point, go ahead, Kate.
No, I was going to start with another question, so I don't want to cut off that thought. Go on.
I said at some point, I will talk about what I think of as being one of the most powerful and valuable guidelines for the promotion of deeper connection. It's an acronym that comes from the work of Dan Hughes called PACE. But we won't go into it today, but we'll spend some time on that, because I think for me it's been so helpful to have that in the back of my mind and going PACE and remembering what that means as I move forward in interactions with an adult or a child.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you just say what the acronym stands for, just so that we don't leave people completely.
We're going to give away a lot, Kate.
You don't have to explain it.
All right. It stands for, and each of these have to be understood in a very specific way. So I'm going to give you a teaser, but I don't want you to think you know what it's all about until we talk about it in more detail and I share more of Hughes's perspective and a little bit of my modification on that, but it really comes from the work of Hughes. So P is for not patience. Many parents go patience. It's playful. Playfulness is not the icing on the cake. It is part of the cake. Second is acceptance. That's deep acceptance of all things, all thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Not all behavior, but all thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Third is curiosity, a deep sense of wanting to know that child. And E is for empathy. And there are two components to empathy. One is the child feeling felt. Okay? And the second is the parent's knowledge of that child that allows the parent to know what the child can tolerate and what they can't. Mm-hmm. So that they're not throwing the child into the deep end when they don't know how to swim, metaphorically. The parent knows what they can manage. And titrates or scaffolds is a term that's used sometimes, that child in there. But it takes empathic awareness, because the child isn't going to be able to tell you. So often I see parents saying, well, sweetie, tell me what you need. And all I see on the kid's face is, holy shit, you don't know what I need. I'm in real trouble because I have no clue what I need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I, I've experienced with my own children that, I have two, and they react completely different ways to that kind of sense of overwhelm and not, me not knowing what they need, or them being in a situation where they're overwhelmed, essentially, and one just shuts down and the other one gets really angry. And that's the typical, freeze, I guess, and fight. And it's hard to deal with both of them in different ways, but the shutdown one is essentially, it's like, it's taken me a long time to read that as she's overwhelmed. She doesn't know what to do. So we need to kind of like really make it a lot safer for her right now.
Absolutely. I just realized I didn't have my mic on, Kate.
All this great conversation.
Were you able to hear me?
I could hear you, yeah, but it does sound better now with the mic.
Yeah.
So that leads into kind of what my next question was going to be, which is if we could kind of give some examples or role play, and if we bring it back to hope. I mean, I have to be honest, John, my fear is that every single topic that we talk about is going to devolve back to empathize with your child.
Yes.
Week after week.
The good news, it makes it quite simple.
Right. But so then we're going to use every single topic to approach that empathy, I guess, through
yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, there are issues of the communication style. There's how do you help kids de-escalate, or self-regulate. I mean, there's a whole lot but in the discussion of all of those things, I think at the core, you are going to come back to these issues and how do you manage them under different circumstances. How do you manage them with a teenager versus a toddler? How do you, it's not to say it's simple at all. It's kind of like, I know how to lose 10 pounds and I'd like to. It's simple. There's nothing to it.
Exactly. Right. So let's, using this topic of hope that we started with, let's talk about a couple, and I think it's really helpful when we actually either talk about a specific situation or role play, and you give some kind of physical and verbal things that parents can actually do to kind of tune in.
Yeah. That sounds great. Do you have a situation that you want to put out there? I think that, I've raised kids. I was a kid. I've raised kids. I've got grandkids. So it's not like I haven't, been down these paths, but I also want to make certain that I don't want you to give me a softball. I want you to give me a tough one. Because softballs aren't going to be helpful.
Right. So, I guess there's two things. We talked about hope at this moment because it's kind of the beginning of the new year, and it's a cultural time when we sort of like want to wipe the slate clean, and there's just a feeling of hope. So one question is, on a daily basis, what are some ways, apart from just empathizing with your child in general, that you kind of get them thinking in a hopeful way?
I love that question because I have a good answer for that.
You did not coordinate beforehand.
One of the most powerful antecedents of hope is gratitude. Gratitude is a powerful kind of opening to the softer side of our experience of life, of reality. What I would say, one of the most helpful ways that you can support the evolution of hope in a child is through your active engagement in moments of gratitude. Now, gratitude doesn't mean that you're walking around going, I'm so happy, everything's wonderful, I'm grateful. I mean, we'd hate anybody who did that. That doesn't work.
Yeah. And also, there's only so many times you can say to your kid before bed, like, okay, tell me something you were grateful for today. I mean,
it has absolutely nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is you as a parent working within the practice of gratitude. You as a parent. And what gratitude entails is stopping for a moment, experiencing something for which you are grateful, for 1 second, 2 seconds, just stopping. It's a decision to stop and then move forward. There's there are a couple of very sweet videos on this coming out of a contemplative aspect of Catholicism, that it's around something called centering prayer. And at some point we can put a link up for a very sweet TED Talk done by a brother, probably an 80-year-old brother, who talks about gratitude as this process of just stopping and then sharing it. I'll tell you, my dad, he had his strengths and weaknesses, but he had more strengths and weaknesses, just a good, kind, and thoughtful man. But one of the things that my dad, I remember so well, my dad was a Presbyterian minister, and he wasn't into doctrine. He just had a friend in Jesus. That was his deal, But my dad would walk out of the house oftentimes, and he'd look at the sky, and he'd say, "What a day the Lord has given us." And we as kids, we'd all just be there going, "All right, Dad, I guess." But we saw this smile on his face. And I think I see that with teachers working with kids. I see that with parents. It's just stopping, and it's stopping the car for a moment and saying, "Look at that cow out there. Look how cute he is," or "Look at this guy," or "Hey, guys, go wash your hands." And then you go in there washing their hands, say, "Oh, feel how that warm water and soap feels on your hands. Isn't that sweet?" I love that feeling. Just taking seconds to stop, because peace is found in the moment. Hope is found in the moment. Gratitude is found in the moment. That's what meditation and mindfulness is all about. So it is not hard to have a practice, if you're really, really conscious of it, of gratitude with your kids. To say, when you walked in and I saw that smiling face of yours, oh my goodness, what joy it gave me. That's it.
So you're talking, so it's very much sharing your own gratitude rather than trying to elicit your child's gratitude.
It's caught, it's not taught.
Okay. And so that, I think, also dovetails into sort of stories that we tell and verbalizing these things, right? So, are there ways of narrating either your life, your family life, your child's life, again, so that they so that they show appreciation, like you're talking about, and or so that they kind of frame things in a hopeful way?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kate. I mean, I think that, what I'm talking about is largely, if we were to go to a brain model, because I am attachment informed, but also the interpersonal neurobiology field, which dovetails with attachment, is also very dear to me. And you'll hear me reference my sometimes simplistic understanding of neuroanatomy and such, but it's not completely simplistic, although it is not as much as some have. But if we think about the right and left hemisphere of the brain, the right hemisphere being, emotion, a lot of creativity. It's in what's called the lower limbic system of the right hemisphere, and the left hemisphere, and more in the upper brain. We have logic, we have language, we have reasoning, kind of those linear things. I know Dan Siegel says the left side of the brain loves that all those things start with an L. And the right side of the brain just looks at it and goes, "Who cares?" So we have these parts within us, and what Siegel speaks about so eloquently, not in some of his books about kids as well, but some of his little more scholarly stuff talks about, the power of integration of the right and the left, that's when we get our greatest stability. And so what I was talking about was largely moments, feelings. They're real more right brain kind of. But when we're able to take one of those experiences and then give a little story to it, even mom or dad's saying, for me, wow, what a beautiful day the Lord has given us. It was kind of like, all right, there's a story. You know, I haven't
Right. Yeah.
where the hell this came from, but it's certainly appreciated.
Yeah.
So stories are powerful and very important. Narratives help us make sense out of so much of that stuff in the right hemisphere that's dreamlike, that's just kind of always moving around. So helping our kids create a coherent narrative about both difficult things and joyful things. Narratives integrate when they're about emotion. They integrate. They bring together the right and the left. And that's when we find real stability.
So talk about like specific examples. You know, your child comes and says, "I don't have any friends, and I'm never going to make them." You know, that kind of. If they're stuck in a unhopeful narrative, what are some ways that parents can shift that to a more hopeful one?
First, what I want to tell you not to do is to tell them, try to convince them that they're wrong. Okay? Because what that child is feeling in that moment is profoundly alone. They're suffering with the sense of aloneness in their peer group. So they need us for a period of time. You know, I know my daughter would shoot me if I told, well, she'll probably see this at some point, but she had a tough period with her friends when she was in middle school.
Who doesn't, John? I mean,
yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And she's a clinical social worker, so she's heard me talk about this stuff before in groups where I've been, where she's been. She's never liked it, but nonetheless, I persist. But there was a period where she was lonely. And I remember we had a dear friend who was a guidance counselor of kids that age. And we were talking to her one day, Jan, my wife and I, and she said, you know, right now, your job is to be her friend. That's it. It's your job to be her friend. And how helpful that was. You know, when you have a child who's talking about being alone, one of the ways to enhance their aloneness is by not getting it, by not helping them feel felt by how much it sucks to feel alone and be a kid. So you just show up and feel it with them. You show up and you show not just with your words, because anytime you're trying to help a child master an emotion, if you give words to it, which are coming from your left hemisphere, and they're all lost down in that right hemisphere, it's an empathic miss. You got to show up. You got to probably just shut up for a minute. Use your nonverbals, because nonverbals come out of the right hemisphere, out of the right. Use your nonverbals. Look sad, look, and then just be with them. Be with them. And then give words to it. Say, oh, sweetie, so you go to school, and you just feel alone on the playground. Oh, gosh, that's so hard, Duncan. Just pet names, be tender as you can be, but be with them. And what you'll oftentimes see once they experience you is with them, it allows the anxiety of that isolation to abate a bit. And they begin to be able to use a little bit of their left brain and come up with the stories. But I don't like those kids anyway. Okay, all right, that works right now. Or they come up with, but Mary did say she wanted to come over someday. So what comes out of them is fine. What we give them as parents of suggestions almost always just make the kid feel more alone, because parents are clueless. Some of the literature on bullying suggesting that one of the worst things a child can do is bring adults into a situation where they're being bullied. What they need is a parent who knows how to be with them, and then ultimately to help coach them a little bit on how to take the power of the bully away on their own without the adult involvement. I'm not saying you never bring adults into bullying situations, but a lot of what is intuitively sound for us as parents is unfortunately pretty ineffective.
So
that's what keeps me in business, Kate.
Sorry?
That's what keeps me in business. Company usually doing really good things that make a lot of sense, and of course they should have worked. The dilemma is they didn't.
Interesting.
Now what do we do?
Interesting. So I just want to highlight that, because I just want to make sure that I heard that right, and that we highlight that it sounded like when a kid is having negative self-talk or feeling negative and they express that, so instead of kind of challenging what they're saying, you feel with them, and then you're saying that naturally they usually kind of come up with a challenge to those negative thoughts themselves.
I think that's exactly what I'm saying, and I think that that's hard to do. You know when it's hardest to do is when a child is saying something negative about us as a parent. You wanted me to, you wanted my friend to not be able to come over. You fixed dinner that I didn't like because I don't like it, and you didn't care. Or, when those things are coming at you, there's a twofold. One, we want to correct their mistake, and two, we want to defend ourselves.
Right.
Neither of which are very effective.
So what would you do in that situation?
All right. What would I do in that situation, or what should I do in that situation?
What should you do?
I've been, I'm still parenting kids, and I'm not full time, clearly. But what I would hope I would do with that is say, oh, buddy, it must feel awful that you think I wanted you to not be able to have your friend come over. And their response is, yeah, it does. You didn't care. You don't care that I'm lonely. You didn't. And I say, oh man. So you think your granddad just wanted you to have a miserable day? It must feel awful to think that's how your granddad. No, I don't think that. I know that's how you feel, granddad. Oh God, it must be awful to know that your granddad doesn't care whether or not you have a friend to play with today. Oh, I feel awful about that.
And that's all?
Basically. Yeah. What have I done in that? When we talk about teaching children to self-regulate, we'll learn a lot more about this, or we'll talk a lot more about it. But what I've done in that moment is I've joined the child. A child is vibrating because they've got this sense that this bad thing happened and they didn't even give a damn that it happened. Matter of fact, they wanted it to happen. And the first thing I need to do is help quiet that vibration. And how do we quiet vibration in a child or an adult? Somebody comes along and they get us, and we feel felt. And now that vibration begins to quiet down. And it may not immediately go to, well, Granddad, I know you didn't mean to do that. It may not go there immediately. It may later, when they bring you over a piece of their candy or something, that's where they're trying to say, but what happens once they're quieted down, they can begin to think. They begin to figure out what the next step is. One of AA, one of the sayings in AA is when in doubt, do the next right thing. And when we're like this, we have no idea what the next right thing is. When we calm down, we may know, we have some sense of what the next right thing is. It may be to go outside. It may be to go pet your dog. It may be to do whatever. Mm-hmm. But you got a child like this and you start directing them, it isn't going to work.
So as a parent, do you ever get, or parent in that case, do you ever get to defend yourself and kind of set the record straight?
I don't need to. Because I know I don't want to give a little one the power or the responsibility. I don't want to give them the power of my needing them to see things the way I see them. That's way too much power for a child. Okay. Nor do I want to give them the responsibility to take care of me that way. So no, I don't need to do that, because you know what? I know that I didn't do that to be unkind to him. I know that.
But does he, but I mean, yeah, so not maybe to set the record straight for you, but you want him to know that clearly.
If I start trying to get him to reflect back to me what I want him to say or see or understand, it's not going to go very well. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't go very well. It doesn't mean that there isn't a later point, once everything's calm, where you can go back and say, I'm sorry, buddy. I know you thought I just didn't care, but I was tired, or I had this meeting I had to go to, and I am sorry about that. There is very little of value, very little that actually happens when we try to convince a child that we're the good guy. It doesn't work. And it makes us look powerless. Makes us look a little desperate. And one of the most important things as parents we have to do is we have to hold on to our power, because our power is what makes kids feel safe. When we hold on to our power, they feel safe. And there are certain things that we do that give away our power, like needing them to tell us the truth about something, that we know the truth on. But I need you to tell me that. Well, now they've got power. They can thwart our efforts. They got it all. That you're going to eat your peas. No, don't think I am. We give away our power in those moments, and it's not good.
That sounds like an incredibly interesting topic for a whole nother session. So
holding on to power is one of the things, as I consult the teachers, particularly teachers working with emotionally disturbed kids, more troubled kids, or treatment settings, hospitals with troubled kids. That's a huge part of the discussion, is how do you hold on to your power, because much of it is counterintuitive.
As is some of this. So I guess just then to kind of leave people with, so that that was super clear and helpful about how the best way to respond to kind of a feeling of unhopefulness in our child is to really to start to feel them and accompany them first, but that is counterintuitive. So do you have any just like ways that parents can think about to help them get to remember in the moment and get into that practice?
Think about a child who's in that sad, lonely, difficult place. Think about their little right hemisphere. It's vibrating. It's vibrating, and they can't think. It interferes with their thinking. Bruce Perry, at some point, will present. I'll present some really interesting work that he did in looking at how information gets processed by children's brains when they are agitated, when they're anxious. It's some fascinating stuff. Perry did a nice job with that. We'll come to that someday. But recognize that little one's brain is vibrating. And the only task at hand, the only task is to help that little right limbic system stop vibrating. And you do that, if it were vibrating, if it were a bell, it's like the bell's ringing. It's vibrating. How do you stop a bell from ringing? Well, you dampen it. You don't put a piece of metal to it and say, you better stop ringing, bell. You don't do so. What you do is you put a blanket or you do something around that. So parents thinking about that little brain is vibrating. And what the child needs in that moment is your capacity to go in there and help them feel felt, because that's what quiets them. So the bell metaphor, I think, is useful in terms of just thinking about it.
Definitely. I have not heard that one, and it definitely makes sense. I have one last question on this topic of hope, and I think it's around giving permission for hopeful and good feelings, which might sound like, we don't need them, but I've experienced and I sort of see in the culture just a couple of things really. One is like, well, don't get your hopes up because they might be dashed. So it's like that the assumption is that dashed hopes is the worst thing that could happen to you. So, why would you hope in the first place? And then, and even more broadly, just sort of like, don't feel too happy either, because we don't know what's going to happen, or it's, unseemly or something like that. And I feel like, part of helping kids feel hope is that they are allowed and encouraged to feel hopeful.
Yeah. And they'll say things like, with a little one, when they say, I want to grow up and be
in the NBA.
Professional, in the NBA. But then when they reach adolescence and they say, I want to play in the NBA, and that they haven't made the junior varsity team ever, it can bring in us this sense of, oh my goodness, I need to help. I need to help protect them by giving them the truth. Mm-hmm. We can talk about all that on another day, but that's not your job in that situation. Reality, life will provide child of plenty of evidence, ultimately, on what's real and what isn't. Your job is to hope for that child. Your job is to say to that child, oh, that would be cool, wouldn't it, buddy? I don't know if you'll make it. A lot of people don't, but you might. Who the hell knows, bud? That'd be cool. But I think that maybe more specifically, the idea of protecting yourself from broken hope. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a psychological defense. It's not a particularly high level one or sophisticated one. It's fundamentally a bit of a depressive one. It's saying keep your hope down. Now, once again, the hope is not organized around aspirations. Hope is and that doesn't mean it never doesn't have some of those components, but hope is more about a feeling. Mm-hmm. It's not specific. So I think to anybody who tells you to dampen your hopes, and say, go to hell. I don't know. That's all I got.
Yeah, but you're saying that from your point of view, but for a child who is getting that message, and or for parents who might just feel a kind of impulse to keep it contained.
To protect them from being disappointed.
Yeah.
That is not your job. Life will disappoint them. Mm-hmm. Your job, though, is to find joy in them, to help them feel felt when the disappointment comes. If you are the bearer, if in your effort to protect a child from disappointment, you're the one who carries the message, you not only is the child encountering the disappointment, but it's coming from you. Mm-hmm. The person whom they need to have a sense of. We intellectually know why we're doing it, but it is not experienced by kids generally as helpful at all. It's a little bit of a betrayal.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't think I can do it.
Teenagers, boy, you see that a lot.
Yeah. But I did hear you say, I don't know if you'll make it. A lot of people don't, so there is a certain, like, because are you presumably doing a disservice if, again, I hear you that we're not talking about achievements, but kids often do talk about achievements. So it's, so, and their dreams too. How do you help them reality proof so that in actuality they might be able to achieve something better, knowing what the obstacles could be?
Reality will visit itself upon them, Kate. I think it is okay, in that example I used, it's also really nice when parents can bring themselves into it and say, yeah, I wanted to be a baseball player. And I think I could have maybe done it if I would have worked harder, but it didn't work out. But you know what, buddy? I love my life. Mm-hmm. I love where I am right now. And maybe you're going to be an NBA player, and that'd be cool. But that's not the only hope I have for you, pal. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're just trying to soften it all. So that not to make the child soft. I mean, I think there's a misperception that we soften it and we make children not resilient. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And at some point, there's plenty to talk to on that topic. Maybe down the road we'll talk about apprehension around coddling or making children more less resilient by virtue of the more supportive parenting stance. Mm-hmm.
Well, great. I've been taking notes, so we will return to these things in the future.